Sometimes heroes don't wear capes or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear scrubs stained with blood and tears, walking on legs that barely carry them forward. Sometimes they stand at the edge of chaos with nothing but their training, their heart, and an unbreakable will to save lives when everyone else has given up hope. In a remote field hospital where death seemed certain and rescue impossible, one woman's refusal to abandon her post would become the difference between tragedy and miracle. Her name was Sarah Chen, and though her injured leg made every step agony, she would soon prove that the strongest people aren't those who never fall. They're the ones who keep standing, even when their bodies scream to give up. This is the true story of how a limping nurse became the last line of defense for 6 souls trapped between life and death, and how 4 helicopters would arrive just in time to witness something extraordinary. It's a story about courage that doesn't roar but whispers, "I'll stay," when everyone else says run. Sarah Chen's shift was supposed to end at midnight, but the emergency radio crackled to life just as she finished cleaning the last of the medical equipment in the remote field hospital. The voice on the other end was thick with panic and static interference from the storm raging outside. "Medical emergency at construction site 7, multiple casualties, trapped workers, need immediate assistance." The dispatcher's voice broke through the white noise. "All available medical personnel report immediately." Sarah looked down at her left leg, wrapped in bandages from her motorcycle accident 3 days earlier. The doctor had told her to stay off it for at least a week, but the small mountain town of Pine Ridge only had 2 qualified nurses, and her colleague Maria was already handling an emergency appendectomy with the town's only surgeon. The nearest major hospital was 4 hours away, through winding mountain roads that became treacherous in weather like this. She grabbed her medical bag and emergency supplies, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through her injured leg with each step. The construction site was 20 minutes away by ambulance, but with the storm, it would take longer. As she loaded the portable medical equipment into the emergency vehicle, her radio came alive again. "Update on Site 7 emergency. Underground tunnel collapse, 6 workers trapped, structural damage preventing immediate extraction, estimated rescue time unknown." The dispatcher paused, and Sarah could hear the gravity in her voice. "Injuries appear severe. Medical personnel needed to stabilize until extraction possible." Sarah's hands moved quickly over her emergency checklist. Trauma kits, pain medication, oxygen tanks, portable defibrillator, emergency surgery supplies. She had trained for situations like this. The training never prepared you for the real thing. Her leg throbbed with each movement, but adrenaline was already taking over, dulling the pain and sharpening her focus. The drive to the construction site was harrowing. Wind howled around the ambulance, and rain hammered the windshield so hard the wipers could barely keep up. The ambulance driver, Tom Rodriguez, had been working emergency services for 15 years, but even he gripped the steering wheel tight as they navigated the narrow mountain roads. "Heard this is a big one, Sarah," Tom said, his voice tense. "Tunnel they were building for the new highway project. Been working around the clock to meet some deadline. Word is they hit unstable ground and the whole thing came down." Sarah checked her equipment one more time. "How many trapped?" 6 confirmed, but could be more. Construction foreman is on site with the details." Tom navigated around a fallen tree branch. "Emergency teams are coming from 3 counties, but with this storm we're the first medical on scene." When they arrived at the construction site, the scene was chaos illuminated by emergency floodlights that cast eerie shadows through the driving rain. Construction vehicles, police cars, and fire trucks surrounded a massive hole in the ground where the tunnel entrance had been. What remained was a twisted mass of steel beams and concrete rubble. Fire Chief Marcus Williams met Sarah at the ambulance, his face grim under his yellow helmet. "Thank God you're here. We've got 6 men trapped about 40 feet down. Tunnel collapsed during the night shift. We can hear them. Some are conscious and talking, but the structural damage is severe. Our engineers say any attempt to move the debris could cause secondary collapse." Sarah surveyed the scene, her medical training automatically assessing the situation. "Injuries? From what we can tell through the radio contact, 2 appear to have broken bones. 1 possible internal injuries, 1 unconscious but breathing, and 2 seem mobile but trapped. They've been down there for about 2 hours now." The rain was getting heavier, and Sarah could see water beginning to pool around the collapsed entrance. "Water getting into the tunnel?" Chief Williams nodded grimly. "That's our biggest concern right now. The storm is overwhelming the drainage systems. We estimate maybe 6 hours before water levels become critical down there." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. 6 hours to get them out, and that was if they were lucky. She looked at the rescue team setting up equipment, the careful coordination required to prevent further collapse. The delicate balance between speed and safety. Her leg was already aching from standing, but she pushed the pain aside. "I need to get down there," she said. Chief Williams looked at her with surprise. "Sarah, that tunnel is barely stable. We can't risk sending anyone else down until the structural engineers give clearance. Those men need medical attention now. Every minute we wait increases their chances of going into shock, bleeding out, or worse. I'm small enough to fit through gaps your rescue workers can't, and I know emergency field medicine." "Sarah, you're limping. This isn't safe for someone in your condition." She met his eyes with determination. "Chief, I've been treating injuries and saving lives for 8 years. A hurt leg doesn't change my ability to stop bleeding or stabilize someone in trauma. Those men don't have time to wait for perfect conditions." Tom, the ambulance driver, stepped forward. "She's right, Chief. I've worked with Sarah on dozens of emergencies. She doesn't quit." Chief Williams studied Sarah's face for a moment, seeing the unwavering resolve there. He knew the statistics as well as she did. In traumatic injuries, the first hour was critical. They called it the golden hour for a reason. "All right, but we do this safe and smart. We'll rid you with radio communication, safety lines, and emergency extraction procedures. First sign of structural instability, you come back up immediately." Sarah nodded and began preparing her medical supplies for descent. She selected the most essential items: trauma bandages, pain medication, emergency airway equipment, and supplies for treating shock. Everything had to fit in one bag she could carry while navigating the dangerous terrain below. As the rescue team prepared the safety equipment, Sarah heard voices echoing from the collapsed tunnel. Faint but definitely human. These weren't just statistics or casualties. They were real people with families waiting at home, probably wondering why dad or husband or son wasn't answering his phone. The emergency coordinator handed her a radio headset. "Channel 4 for surface communication, Channel 7 for emergency extraction. You'll have a dedicated rescue team standing by at all times." Sarah clipped the radio to her belt and adjusted the headlamp the rescue team had given her. The descent harness felt secure around her waist, and despite her injured leg, she felt ready. This was what she had trained for, what she had chosen when she became a nurse. To help people when they needed it most, regardless of the circumstances or personal cost. "One more thing," Chief Williams said as Sarah prepared to descend. "Weather service is tracking this storm, and it's not moving fast. We might have company coming, regional emergency response teams, but they're still hours out. You're our best hope right now." Sarah took a deep breath and looked down into the dark opening the rescue team had cleared through the rubble. Somewhere below were 6 people counting on her medical skills to keep them alive until they could be extracted. Her leg throbbed, but her hands were steady. "Lower me down," she said. The descent into the collapsed tunnel was like entering another world. The sound of the storm faded, replaced by the creaking of stressed metal and the steady drip of water finding its way through cracks in the rubble. Sarah's headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow space between fallen beams and chunks of concrete. About 20 feet down, she heard the first voice clearly. "Hello? Is someone there? Please, we need help." "This is Sarah. I'm a nurse," she called back, her voice echoing in the confined space. "I'm coming down to help you. How many of you are conscious?" 4 of us can talk. 2 aren't responding, but they're breathing." "Oh God, we thought no one was coming." Sarah felt a surge of determination as she continued her careful descent through the debris. Above her, the storm raged on, but down here in the darkness, 6 lives hung in the balance, and she was their lifeline to survival. The beam of Sarah's headlamp finally illuminated the faces of the trapped workers, and what she saw made her heart sink. The tunnel had partially collapsed, creating a pocket of space about 8 feet high and 20 feet long. Water was already ankle-deep and slowly rising. 6 men were scattered around the space, some sitting against the tunnel walls, others lying motionless. "Thank God you're here," said a bearded man who appeared to be in his 40s. "I'm Frank Morrison, site foreman. We've been trapped for almost 3 hours now." Sarah quickly assessed the scene with her medical training. 2 men were unconscious but breathing, lying on makeshift beds created from construction materials. One man sat holding his arm at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Another had blood seeping through his work shirt, and 2 others appeared mobile but exhausted and showing early signs of shock. "Okay, I'm Sarah Chen, registered nurse. I'm here to stabilize everyone until the rescue team can get you out safely." She set down her medical bag and immediately went to the unconscious men first. Unconscious patients were always the priority in triage. The first unconscious worker was a young man, maybe 25, with a head injury. Blood had dried around a gash on his forehead, and his breathing was shallow but steady. Sarah checked his pulse, rapid but strong. and examined his pupils with a small flashlight. Concussion for sure, possibly more serious brain trauma. What's his name? Sarah asked Frank while she worked. That's Miguel Santos. Real good kid, just started last month. Has a baby at home. Sarah felt a pang of emotion but pushed it aside. Personal connections could wait. Right now, Miguel needed medical attention. She cleaned the head wound and applied pressure bandages to stop any remaining bleeding. His vital signs suggested he was stable but needed to be monitored constantly. The second unconscious worker was older, maybe 50, and his situation was more complicated. He was breathing, but Sarah could see signs of internal bleeding. Pale skin, rapid pulse, and his abdomen was tender to the touch. Robert Chen, no relation, Frank said. Took a hit from falling debris right in the gut. Been unconscious for about an hour now. Sarah's training kicked in. Possible internal hemorrhaging meant Robert was in critical condition. She established an IV line to maintain blood pressure and administered fluid replacement therapy. It wasn't ideal treatment, but it might keep him stable until they could get him to a proper surgical facility. All right, who's next? Sarah moved to the man with the broken arm. Jimmy Castillo, the man said through gritted teeth. Pretty sure my arm is busted. Happened when I was trying to help Robert. Sarah examined the fracture. Clean break of the radius, painful but not immediately life-threatening. She splintered the arm with materials from her kit and supplies she improvised from the construction site. This is going to hurt for a while, Jimmy, but the bone will heal fine once we get you to a hospital. The man with blood on his shirt was David Park, a 40-year-old electrician. The bleeding came from several deep cuts from metal shards, but none had hit major arteries. Sarah cleaned and sutured the wounds, working by headlamp in the cramped space. Her injured leg was starting to throb from crouching and moving around, but she ignored it. The two remaining workers, brothers named Antonio and Carlos Ruiz, were physically uninjured but showing signs of psychological trauma and early hypothermia from the cold water pooling around their feet. How long were you working when the collapse happened? Sarah asked Frank while she checked everyone's blood pressure. We were doing final electrical installation for the tunnel lighting system. Been working double shifts to meet the highway department deadline. Should have listened when Carlos said the ground felt unstable yesterday, but the supervisor said we were behind schedule. Sarah noted the rising water level. It had reached nearly to her knees now. Frank, do you know if there's any way to stop the water? Drainage system must have failed when the tunnel collapsed. All the stormwater is flowing into low areas, and we're in the lowest area now. Sarah radioed to the surface. This is Chen, medical status update. I have 2 critical patients requiring immediate hospital transport upon extraction. 1 with possible brain trauma, 1 with internal bleeding. 4 others stable but need extraction soon due to rising water levels. Chief Williams' voice crackled back through static. Copy that, Sarah. Engineering team estimates another 2 hours minimum before safe extraction possible. Water level concerns noted. 2 hours. Sarah looked around at the trapped workers. Miguel's head injury could deteriorate rapidly. Robert's internal bleeding could become fatal if they couldn't get him to surgery soon, and the water was rising steadily. How are you holding up down there? Frank asked, noticing Sarah favor her injured leg. I'm fine. Let's focus on keeping everyone stable and calm. But Sarah wasn't fine. The constant standing and crouching in the confined space was aggravating her leg injury. More concerning, she was starting to recognize the signs of a developing emergency situation that could quickly spiral out of control. She established a treatment rotation, checking vital signs every 15 minutes, adjusting Robert's IV drip, monitoring Miguel's consciousness level, and reassessing everyone else's condition. The rising water was her biggest concern. Cold water meant hypothermia, and if the level continued rising at the current rate, they would soon have a drowning emergency in addition to the medical trauma. Tell me about your families, Sarah said to the conscious workers. Let's keep everyone talking and alert. Jimmy started talking about his teenage daughter, who was on the high school volleyball team. Antonio and Carlos shared stories about their mother, who had immigrated from Mexico 40 years ago and still cooked traditional family dinners every Sunday. Frank talked about his wife, who taught elementary school and worried every time he left for work on dangerous construction projects. As they talked, Sarah continued her medical monitoring routine, but she also listened to the sounds around them. The water dripping had become a steady flow in some places. Metal creaked ominously overhead, and through her radio she could hear the surface rescue teams working frantically against time and weather. Sarah, Miguel's voice was weak but conscious. She immediately knelt beside him, checking his pupils and pulse. Miguel, how are you feeling? Head hurts real bad. Where am I? You're in a tunnel that collapsed, but we're going to get you out soon. Just stay still and try to stay awake for me, okay?
Miguel nodded slightly, then winced from the pain.
But consciousness was a good sign. His brain injury might not be as severe as Sarah had initially feared. His pulse was getting weaker, and Sarah suspected he was losing blood internally faster than her IV fluids could compensate. He needed surgical intervention soon, or he wouldn't survive much longer. The water level reached Sarah's thighs. At this rate, the unconscious patients would be underwater within an hour. She made a decision that went against normal rescue protocol, but felt necessary given the circumstances. Frank, I need your help. We have to move Robert and Miguel to higher ground. But the rescue team said not to move anyone unnecessarily. The water's going to drown them if we don't move them now. Help me get them up on those concrete blocks. Working together, they carefully lifted both unconscious men onto a pile of concrete debris that was about 3 feet higher than the tunnel floor. It wasn't ideal for spinal injury protocols, but drowning was a more immediate threat than potential spinal damage. Sarah's radio crackled. Chen, we're getting weather updates. Storm is intensifying, and we're tracking more precipitation heading your way. How critical is the water situation? Sarah looked around the flooded tunnel. Water is at chest level on the patients now. If the rate continues, we'll have a drowning emergency within 45 minutes. Copy. Rescue teams are working on alternative extraction methods. Stand by. Sarah had been in emergency medical situations before, but never one where she was essentially trapped with her patients. Usually, her job was to stabilize and transport to definitive care. Now she was the definitive care, at least until extraction was possible. Miguel spoke again, stronger this time. My wife, does she know? Emergency teams have contacted all the families. Everyone knows you're alive and that we're working to get you out safely. The psychological component was as important as the medical treatment. These men needed hope and reassurance as much as they needed bandages and medication. Sarah had learned that lesson early in her nursing career. Sometimes the most important medicine was simply letting people know they weren't alone. She checked her watch. They had been trapped for 4 hours now. Her leg was sending sharp pains up her spine with every movement, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Her patients couldn't see weakness or uncertainty from their medical provider. Frank, I need you to help me set up a rotation schedule. Jimmy, even with your broken arm, I need you to help monitor Miguel and Robert. Antonio and Carlos, you two are going to help me track the water level and watch for any changes in the tunnel structure. Organizing the group gave everyone a sense of purpose and control, even in their desperate situation. Sarah had learned that people handle trauma better when they felt like they could contribute to their own rescue rather than just being passive victims. As she continued her medical rounds in the rising water, Sarah heard new sounds from above, larger machinery, more voices, what sounded like heavy equipment being moved. The rescue operation was expanding, but whether it was expanding fast enough remained to be seen. The water reached Sarah's waist, and the situation was becoming desperate. Robert's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His pulse was weaker, his breathing more labored, and even with the IV fluids, she was losing the battle against his internal bleeding. Miguel had regained consciousness but was showing signs of increased intracranial pressure from his head injury. Sarah, talk to me down there.
Chief Williams' voice came through the radio with barely controlled urgency.
We need extraction now, Chief. I have one patient who won't survive much longer without surgical intervention, and the water level is becoming critical for all patients. Engineering teams are bringing in specialized equipment, but we're looking at another hour minimum. Can you hold that long? Sarah looked around the flooded tunnel. An hour might as well be forever. She made a decision that would haunt her if it went wrong, but felt necessary given the circumstances. Chief, I need you to patch me through to Regional Medical Center. I need to speak with a trauma surgeon now. Sarah, what are you thinking? I'm thinking Robert is going to die if I don't attempt emergency surgical intervention. I need guidance from a surgeon on emergency field procedures. The radio went quiet for several minutes while the connection was arranged. During that time, Sarah continued monitoring all her patients, but she could see Robert's vital signs failing. His lips were turning blue, indicating decreased oxygen circulation, probably from blood loss and shock. Sarah, this is Dr. Martinez at Regional Medical. I understand you have a patient with suspected internal bleeding, and you're considering field surgery? Dr. Ferdinand Ode. Martinez was the chief trauma surgeon at the regional hospital, and Sarah had worked with him on several emergency transfers. His voice was calm and professional despite the unusual circumstances. Dr. Martinez, patient is a 50-year-old male. Blunt force trauma to the abdomen, signs of internal hemorrhaging, weak pulse, Pale skin, possible splenic or liver injury. I have basic surgical supplies and 8 years of emergency medical experience. Sarah, you know the risks of attempting surgery in those conditions. Without proper imaging, anesthesia, blood supply, sterile environment, doctor, this man dies if I don't try something. The water is rising, extraction is at least an hour away, and he's already showing signs of hypovolemic shock. I need you to talk me through an emergency exploratory procedure. The radio was silent for a long moment. Dr. Martinez was weighing the medical ethics and legal implications of guiding a nurse through emergency surgery in a flooded tunnel. But he was also a doctor who had taken an oath to save lives. All right, Sarah, I'm going to guide you through a basic exploratory laparotomy. You'll need to work fast and clean. Do you have adequate lighting? Sarah positioned her headlamp and asked Frank to hold a flashlight. Lighting is minimal but workable. Sterilization supplies. Basic antiseptic, surgical gloves, limited but adequate. Blood pressure readings? Sarah checked Robert's vitals again. Systolic 80 and dropping, pulse 120 and thready. Okay, we're out of time. Sarah, I'm going to walk you through this step by step. Jimmy, Frank. I need you to assist however Sarah directs. What followed was the most intense 30 minutes of Sarah's medical career. Working in rising flood water by flashlight and headlamp, she performed an emergency abdominal surgery, guided by radio instructions from a trauma surgeon 40 miles away. The source of bleeding was a torn spleen, exactly what Dr. Martinez had suspected from the symptoms. Using basic surgical techniques and improvised instruments, Sarah managed to control the bleeding and stabilize Robert's condition. It wasn't perfect surgery, and he would need proper surgical repair once extracted, but it stopped the immediate threat to his life. Beautiful work, Sarah. Dr. Martinez's voice was filled with professional admiration. You just saved that man's life under impossible conditions. But even as Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction from saving Robert, the overall situation was getting worse. The water level was now at her chest, and the tunnel space was becoming dangerously confined. Miguel's head injury seemed to be causing increased confusion and disorientation. The cold water was affecting everyone's core body temperature, and hypothermia was becoming a serious concern. Everyone listen to me. Sarah addressed the group. We need to conserve body heat and energy. Pair up, share body warmth, keep talking to stay alert. Frank and Jimmy, you take care of each other. Antonio and Carlos, same thing. I'm going to stay with Robert and Miguel. The psychological pressure was enormous. 6 people were depending on her medical expertise to keep them alive in conditions no medical textbook had ever prepared her for. Her own injured leg was now completely numb from the cold water, but she couldn't show any sign of weakness or fear to her patients. Sarah, how's everyone holding up down there? Tom, the ambulance driver's voice came through the radio. We're managing, Tom. How's the extraction progress? They've got some kind of specialized drilling equipment arriving. Trying to create a wider passage without destabilizing the remaining tunnel structure. Also heard something about helicopters being called in from the regional emergency response teams. Helicopters meant serious escalation of the rescue effort. It also meant someone in authority had decided this was beyond the capabilities of local emergency services. That could be good news or very bad news, depending on what the helicopters were bringing. Any word on timeline? Still working on that. But Sarah, everyone up here knows what you're doing down there. You're keeping those men alive against impossible odds. Sarah appreciated the encouragement, but she was more concerned with practical issues. The water was still rising. Her surgical patient needed constant monitoring. Miguel's head injury was unpredictable, and the cold was affecting everyone's mental clarity. Miguel, tell me about your baby, Sarah said, trying to keep him conscious and talking. Little girl, 3 months old. Isabella. Looks just like her mama. Miguel's speech was slurring slightly, which concerned Sarah. What does she like to do? Sleeps most of the time, but when she's awake, she stares at everything like she's trying to figure out the whole world. Smart kid. Keeping Miguel talking was important for monitoring his brain function, but Sarah was also genuinely interested in these men as people, not just medical cases. Frank talked about coaching Little League Baseball. Jimmy's daughter was applying for college scholarships. Antonio and Carlos were saving money to bring their elderly parents to visit from Mexico. These were real people with families and dreams and responsibilities. People who had gotten up that morning planning to come home safely at the end of their work shift. Now they were trapped underground, depending entirely on her ability to keep them alive until professional rescue could reach them. The water reached Sarah's shoulders. At this level, Any unconscious patient would drown without constant support. She made another difficult decision and organized the conscious workers to help maintain the airway of the unconscious patients by physically supporting their heads above water level. Frank, I need you and Jimmy to take shifts supporting Robert. Antonio and Carlos, you're responsible for Miguel. Everyone works in 15-minute rotations so no one gets too exhausted. It was an exhausting and dangerous arrangement, but it was the only way to prevent drowning while waiting for extraction. Sarah coordinated the rotation while continuing to monitor everyone's medical condition and watching for signs of tunnel instability. Her radio crackled with new information. Sarah, this is Chief Williams. I have updates on extraction and medical support. Engineering teams estimate 45 minutes until safe extraction passage is ready. More importantly, we have 4 medical helicopters inbound with advanced trauma teams and surgical capability. 4 helicopters meant a major regional emergency response. It also meant someone had made the decision to treat this as a mass casualty event requiring the highest level of emergency medical support available. What's the helicopter ETA? First chopper lands in 20 minutes, others arriving at 15-minute intervals. They're bringing portable surgical equipment, blood supply, advanced trauma specialists. Soon as we get you people out of there, you'll have the best emergency medical care in the region. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with continued concern. Help was coming, but they still had to survive the next 45 minutes in rising floodwater, while maintaining life support for critically injured patients using nothing but basic medical supplies and determination. Copy that, Chief. Tell the helicopter teams we'll have 2 critical patients requiring immediate surgical transport, 2 patients with serious but stable injuries, and 2 patients with minor injuries and hypothermia. As Sarah continued her medical monitoring routine in water that now reached her neck, she heard new sounds from above. The distinctive whop 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 of approaching helicopters. Professional medical help was finally on the way, but the next hour would determine whether her efforts to keep everyone alive had been successful. The sound of the first helicopter landing above sent vibrations through the remaining tunnel structure, and Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with renewed urgency. The water was now at neck level for everyone, and maintaining airway support for Robert and Miguel required constant effort from the conscious workers. Sarah, first helicopter team is on site. Chief Williams radioed. Doctor, Patricia Hawkins, Chief Flight Surgeon, wants to speak with you directly. Doctor, Hawkins' voice came through with crisp professional authority. Sarah, this is Dr. Hawkins. I understand you've been providing medical care under extraordinary conditions. I need a detailed status report on all patients. Sarah provided a rapid but thorough medical briefing while continuing to monitor Robert's post-surgical condition and Miguel's neurological status. Patient 1, Robert Chen, emergency splenectomy performed approximately 40 minutes ago, stable but needs immediate surgical follow-up. Patient 2, Miguel Santos, head trauma with intermittent consciousness. Possible intracranial pressure increase. 4 additional patients with various injuries, all stable but hypothermic. Outstanding work, Sarah. I'm sending down my trauma specialist, Dr. Kim, with advanced medical equipment. He'll assist with patient stabilization while we complete extraction preparations. Within minutes, Doctor. Kim descended into the tunnel with waterproof medical equipment including portable monitors, advanced airway management tools, and emergency medications. His presence immediately transformed Sarah's improvised field hospital into a more sophisticated medical operation. Dr. Kim, this is incredible what you've accomplished down here, he said as he quickly assessed each patient. Emergency surgery in these conditions, I've never seen anything like it. Working together, Sarah and Dr. Kim established advanced monitoring for all patients, improved airway management for the unconscious workers, and administered medications to combat hypothermia and shock. Having a second medical professional in the tunnel doubled their capability and gave Sarah her first moment to assess her own condition. Her injured leg was completely numb from cold and hours of standing in freezing water. She was exhausted, soaked, and running on pure adrenaline. But her patients were stable and professional help had arrived. Sarah, extraction team reports 15 minutes until safe passage completion. Dr. Kim reported after checking with the surface teams. How are you holding up?
I'm fine.
Let's focus on keeping everyone stable until extraction. But Dr. Kim could see what Sarah wouldn't admit. She was pushing herself beyond normal physical limits. Her injured leg was causing her to favor her right side, and she showed signs of exhaustion and mild hypothermia herself. The extraction process was carefully orchestrated. Engineers had created a stable passage through the debris using specialized equipment, but each person had to be individually lifted through the narrow space using a rescue harness and medical basket system. Robert was extracted first, with Dr. Kim accompanying him to provide continuous medical monitoring during the ascent. The moment he reached the surface, he was immediately transferred to the first helicopter and flown to Regional Medical Center for emergency surgery to properly repair Sarah's field operation. Miguel was next, with Sarah providing detailed neurological status information to the flight medical team. His head injury was serious but appeared stable, and the helicopter team had advanced neurosurgical capability if his condition deteriorated during transport. The remaining workers were extracted in order of injury severity: Jimmy with his broken arm, David with his sutured lacerations, and finally Antonio and Carlos, who had become hypothermic but were otherwise uninjured. Sarah was the last person in the tunnel. As the rescue harness was lowered for her extraction, she took a final look around the flooded space where she had spent the most intense 6 hours of her medical career. The water was now almost to the tunnel ceiling. Another 30 minutes and the entire space would have been completely submerged. The ascent to the surface felt surreal after hours in the dark, cramped tunnel. When Sarah emerged, she was met by Chief Williams, Tom the ambulance driver, and dozens of emergency personnel who had been working throughout the storm to make the rescue possible. "Sarah, you did something extraordinary down there," Chief Williams said as emergency medical personnel checked her condition. "Those men would not have survived without your medical intervention." The scene on the surface was organized chaos. 4 helicopters had landed in a staging area set up in the construction site parking lot. Advanced trauma teams worked on each patient with sophisticated medical equipment that seemed almost magical compared to the basic supplies Sarah had been working with underground. "Doctor," Hawkins approached as Sarah was being checked by the emergency medical team. "Sarah, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 20 years, and what you accomplished in that tunnel ranks among the most impressive medical interventions I've ever encountered. Emergency surgery by flashlight in rising floodwater, that's going to be talked about in medical schools." Sarah was exhausted and still processing the magnitude of what had happened. "I just did what any nurse would do. Those men needed medical care, and I was the only one available to provide it. Sarah, most people would never have attempted what you did. Emergency surgery without proper equipment, maintaining life support in flood conditions, coordinating care for 6 patients simultaneously. That's not what any nurse would do. That's what an exceptional medical professional does." As the helicopters prepared for departure, Sarah learned the final outcomes. Robert was being transported for immediate surgical repair of her emergency splenectomy. The surgeons expected a full recovery. Miguel was being taken to a neurosurgical facility for advanced brain injury assessment, but initial evaluations were optimistic. The other 4 workers would be treated and released after observation for hypothermia and their various injuries. The storm was finally beginning to clear as the last helicopter lifted off. Sarah stood in the construction site supported by Tom, who insisted she shouldn't put weight on her injured leg, watching the aircraft disappear into the night sky carrying the 6 workers she had spent the last 6 hours fighting to keep alive. "Come on, Sarah," Tom said gently. "Let's get you to the hospital to have that leg properly treated." As they drove through the mountain roads now clear of the storm, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had happened. 6 people had been trapped in a collapsed tunnel with rising floodwater. She had performed emergency surgery in conditions no medical textbook could prepare someone for. She had coordinated life support for multiple trauma patients using basic supplies and determination. Most importantly, everyone was alive. Injured, but alive, and expected to recover fully. "Tom, do you think the families know everyone is okay?" "Sarah, the families have been here all night. When the helicopters took off, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Everyone knows their loved ones are alive because of what you did down there." Sarah closed her eyes and leaned back in the ambulance seat. Her leg was sending sharp pains up her spine now that the adrenaline was wearing off, but she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why she had become a nurse, to help people when they needed it most, to use her medical training to save lives in emergency situations. "Sarah," Tom said as they approached the hospital, "you know this is going to be all over the news, right? Local nurse saved 6 trapped workers, performed surgery in collapsed tunnel. This is the kind of story that makes national headlines." Sarah hadn't thought about media attention. She had been focused entirely on medical care and patient survival. The idea of being called a hero felt strange. She had simply done her job under difficult circumstances. But as they arrived at the hospital, Sarah could see that Tom was right. News vehicles were already gathering in the parking lot, and she could see reporters setting up equipment. The story of the limping nurse who refused to abandon her post was already spreading beyond the small mountain town of Pine Ridge. 3 weeks after the tunnel rescue, Sarah received a phone call that would change her understanding of what had happened that stormy night. She was at home still recovering from surgery to properly repair her leg injury that had been aggravated by hours of standing in freezing floodwater when her phone rang. "Is this Sarah Chen, the nurse who was involved in the tunnel rescue?" The voice was professional but warm. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Captain Jennifer Walsh. I was the pilot of the first helicopter that responded to your emergency. I'm calling because there's something you should know about that night. Something that didn't make it into the news reports." Sarah was curious. She had been overwhelmed by media attention following the rescue, with interview requests from national news organizations and offers to appear on television programs. She had declined most of them, preferring to focus on her recovery and return to work. What kind of something? "Sarah, the reason we responded so quickly with 4 helicopters wasn't just because of the scope of the emergency. We received a radio transmission from the tunnel that convinced our emergency coordinator this was a life or death situation requiring maximum response. I remember talking to the surface team several times. No, this was different. About 2 hours into the rescue operation, we received a transmission on emergency frequency. Someone in the tunnel was calling for help using the call sign Angel 6. The transmission described 6 people trapped, with 1 person providing medical care under deteriorating conditions. Sarah felt confused. "I don't remember using any call signs. I just identified myself as Sarah Chen, nurse." "That's what's interesting. We traced the transmission source and it definitely came from your location. But Sarah, no one in that tunnel had access to emergency radio equipment capable of reaching our helicopter dispatch frequency. The workers' radios were all damaged in the collapse, and your medical radio was on local emergency channels." Captain Walsh continued. "The transmission was clear and detailed. It provided exact coordinates, described the medical conditions of all patients, and specifically requested helicopter response with surgical capability. That transmission is what triggered the 4 helicopter emergency response." Sarah was silent for a moment, trying to process this information. She remembered the desperate hours in the rising floodwater, the constant radio communication with surface teams, the medical emergencies requiring her full attention. She had no memory of making any transmissions beyond her regular updates to Chief Williams and the medical teams. "Captain Walsh, are you suggesting someone else made that transmission?" "Sarah, I'm a rational person. I've been flying emergency medical helicopters for 15 years. I don't believe in supernatural explanations for things, but I've listened to that transmission recording dozens of times, and I can't explain how it was made or where it came from." Captain Walsh paused before continuing. "There's more. The voice on the transmission was clear and calm, providing detailed medical information that exactly matched the conditions you were dealing with in the tunnel. But Sarah, the voice analysis indicates it wasn't you making that transmission." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? The voice pattern, accent, and speech characteristics don't match your voice recordings from other radio communications that night. It was someone else, someone who knew exactly what was happening in that tunnel, and exactly what emergency response was needed." This revelation was disturbing and mysterious. Sarah had been alone with the 6 trapped workers. There was no one else in the tunnel who could have made such a transmission. Moreover, none of the workers had access to radio equipment, and none of them had medical knowledge sufficient to provide the detailed emergency assessment described in the transmission. "Captain Walsh, could there have been a mistake? Maybe the transmission came from somewhere else?" "We considered that possibility. But the radio direction finding equipment clearly indicated the transmission originated from your coordinates. Plus, the information in the transmission was too accurate about conditions in the tunnel to have come from an outside source." Captain Walsh's voice took on a more personal tone. "Sarah, I wanted you to know about this because it affects how I think about what happened that night. You saved 6 lives through your medical skills and determination. But I believe someone or something was looking out for all of you, making sure the right help arrived at the right time." After the phone call ended, Sarah sat in her living room trying to process this strange information. She had always been a practical, scientifically minded person. Her nursing training emphasized evidence-based medicine and logical problem-solving. But the mystery of the radio transmission challenged her rational worldview. Over the following days, Sarah found herself thinking constantly about the tunnel rescue and the mysterious transmission. She contacted Chief Williams to ask about radio communications from that night. "Sarah, it's funny you should ask," Chief Williams said. "We've been reviewing all the emergency communications from that incident, and there are some things that don't quite add up. We received information about the tunnel situation that helped us coordinate the rescue response, but some of those communications don't appear in our official radio logs."
"What kind of information? Details about structural stability, water flow patterns, optimal extraction procedures?
Information that turned out to be completely accurate and helped us avoid several potential disasters during the rescue operation. But when we tried to trace the source of those communications, we couldn't identify where they came from. Sarah realized that the mysterious radio transmission to the helicopter teams might not have been an isolated incident. It seemed that throughout the rescue operation, someone or something had been providing crucial information to ensure the success of the emergency response. A week later, Sarah received another unexpected phone call. This time, it was Dr. Martinez, the trauma surgeon who had guided her through Robert's emergency surgery. Sarah, I've been thinking about our radio consultation during the tunnel rescue, and I wanted to share something with you. In 30 years of surgery, I've never guided someone through a procedure under such difficult conditions. But during our radio communication, I felt like I was receiving information about the patient's condition that you hadn't actually reported. What do you mean? I found myself making surgical recommendations based on details about internal bleeding patterns, tissue damage, and anatomical considerations that I shouldn't have known from your verbal reports alone. It was as if I had additional information coming from somewhere else. Dr. Martinez continued. Sarah, your surgical technique that night was flawless. You made decisions and performed procedures that demonstrated knowledge beyond your training level. I'm not questioning your skill. I'm saying that somehow you had access to surgical expertise that enabled you to save that man's life. These conversations forced Sarah to confront the possibility that the tunnel rescue had involved elements beyond normal medical emergency response. She had always attributed her successful treatment of the trapped workers to training, adrenaline, and determination. But the accumulated evidence suggested that something extraordinary had occurred that night. 6 months after the tunnel rescue, Sarah received an invitation that brought everything full circle. The 6 workers she had treated wanted to organize a reunion dinner to celebrate their recovery and thank her for saving their lives. The dinner was held at a restaurant in town, and Sarah was amazed to see how well everyone had recovered. Robert showed no lasting effects from his internal injuries or emergency surgery. Miguel had fully recovered from his head trauma with no neurological deficits. Jimmy's arm had healed perfectly, and the other workers showed no lasting effects from their ordeal. During the dinner, Frank Morrison stood up to make a speech. Sarah, all of us here tonight know that we're alive because of what you did in that tunnel. But there's something we've never told you. Something we've talked about among ourselves but never shared publicly. Sarah looked around the table, curious about what Frank was going to say. While we were trapped down there during the worst hours when the water was rising and we thought we might not survive, all of us heard voices, not from the radio, not from the surface rescue teams, but voices in the tunnel with us. Calm voices providing comfort and encouragement, telling us to stay strong, telling us help was coming. The other workers nodded in agreement. Miguel spoke up. Sarah, when I was unconscious from the head injury, I remember hearing someone talking to me, keeping me focused on staying alive. But it wasn't your voice. You were busy treating Robert. Carlos added, when we were holding Robert and Miguel above the water level, I heard someone giving us instructions on proper technique, telling us how to maintain their airways safely. But looking back, I realized no one in the tunnel had that kind of medical knowledge except Sarah, and she was performing surgery at the time. Sarah felt a deep sense of recognition and understanding. The mysterious radio transmissions, the surgical guidance that exceeded her training, the voices of comfort and encouragement heard by the trapped workers, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. You know, Sarah said quietly, throughout that whole night, I never felt like I was working alone. Even though I was the only medical professional in the tunnel, I felt like I was part of a larger team, like there were other people helping guide the medical care and coordinate the rescue. Frank raised his glass to Sarah, who refused to give up on 6 trapped workers. And to whoever else was looking out for all of us that night. As they toasted, Sarah realized that she would probably never have a complete rational explanation for everything that had happened during the tunnel rescue, but she had learned that sometimes the most important things in life, courage, compassion, the determination to help others, operate beyond the boundaries of scientific explanation. A year later, Sarah was promoted to head emergency nurse at Regional Medical Center. Her experience in the tunnel rescue had given her insights into emergency medical care that made her uniquely qualified for the position. She often spoke to medical students and nursing students about the importance of staying calm under pressure and never giving up on patients, even under the most difficult circumstances. But she never talked publicly about the mysterious aspects of the tunnel rescue, the unexplained radio transmissions, the surgical guidance that exceeded her training, the voices of comfort that sustained everyone through their ordeal. Those experiences belong to a realm beyond normal medical practice, a realm where guardian angels might use radio frequencies to coordinate helicopter rescues and whisper encouragement to trapped workers in flooded tunnels. The official report of the tunnel rescue focused on the measurable elements: response times, medical procedures, engineering challenges, and successful patient outcomes. But for Sarah and the 6 workers she had saved, the most important part of the story was unmeasurable: the presence of something beyond themselves that had guided them all through their darkest hours. In quiet moments, when Sarah was alone, she sometimes whispered a simple thank you to whatever force had been present in that tunnel. She never received an audible response, but she always felt a sense of acknowledgement, a gentle confirmation that someone was listening. The tunnel site had been rebuilt and the highway project completed, but for 7 people, that collapsed tunnel would always be remembered as the place where courage, medical skill, and mysterious guidance combined to create a miracle. The place where a limping nurse proved that heroism doesn't require perfect health, just an unbreakable commitment to helping others. And somewhere in the official emergency response records, filed away in archives that few people ever examine, there remains a recording of a radio transmission from call sign Angel 6, a transmission that helped save 6 lives and changed forever how one nurse understood the true nature of emergency medical care.